This is when adrenaline soars, pressure is heightened, and expectations are raised.
Welcome into this special edition of the Golf Central podcast presented by Callaway Golf. I'm Lav, soon to be joined by Rex, and today we are unveiling our number one storyline of the year as voted on by, well, us. Over at golfchannel.com, and you'll never guess what it is. It is the number one story. The golf landscape forever altered by the emergence of LIV Golf. We'll give you our insights and analysis on how this happened, why it happened, and where these two warring sides go from here. But first, Callaway has developed their longest irons ever in the Rogue ST line. These irons are breaking ground with a high-strength 450 AI face cup that's never been seen before in the industry. Now, Callaway has continued to push innovation through their patented urethane microspheres and have massively increased their precision tungsten weighting. The Rogue ST lineup is available in 4 options to suit every type of player, including the Rogue ST Max for incredible speed, forgiveness, and performance. They're available now, and for more information, visit CallawayGolf.com. Rex, really no surprise here. Scotty Scheffler, number 5. Cameron Smith, number 4. Tiger Woods, shockingly, number 3. And Rory McIlroy, stepping up and speaking out, was number 2. So it's really no surprise that we have arrived here on the precipice of what could have been disaster with the PGA Tour and LIV Golf warring 12 months ago. Was there any way you saw the elite men's game in the shape that it is right now?
Before I get to that, and you could have set that up better, actually. You could have teased it. We'll tell you what the most important story of the year is, and then you've done the read, and then you've got to get better at this.
It's so obvious. It's so obvious what it could have been.
So
we hadn't talked about LIV Golf yet. We've thrown little bits and pieces here. There was the Cam Smith. There was Tiger. You kind of taking a leadership role for the PGA Tour. There was Rory. Fiercely defending the PGA Tour, but the actual LIV Golf story of 2022, like, of course it was going to be. Of course it was going to be the number one spot.
I'm glad you mentioned Cam Smith because I'm responding to, and this was from Hector R. Fernandez. I think he popped on you as well, and I think what he's responding to is who was the player, the male player of the year, and I think we talked about Rory, Scotty, and Cam Smith, and he said no! Exclamation point. Smith is, but of course you will dismiss Cameron Smith because of his relationship with LIV Golf. So you know what,
tour
Hector?
Loyalists. You tour loyalists.
You did not
over
listen
the
to
Golf
the
Central
pod,
podcast.
Hector. Had you listened to the pod, you would have gotten all the love you wanted from Cam Smith.
Don't just read the headline, Hector.
That's right. Be better than that, Hector. No, it's absolutely zero surprise that this is it. I've never seen. It was funny. I was in the Hero World Challenge last week, and on Saturday it was actually comical. I wrote a column about a controversy. I wrote a column about a controversy, and the controversy was mud on a golf ball. And I giggled throughout doing the entire column because it was so nonsensical to me that this is where we are in the world. Like all of these things that we've had to write about and address and sort of, try to wrap our minds around. Now all of a sudden we go back to those real controversies, the stuff that matters, mud on a golf ball. I could not have been happier to write that column. I got to be honest with you.
I'm in the NBC Sports studio right now. I'm not in my traditional
Give us
spot.
a look-see, by the way. I know this is a visual, an audio medium by and large, but give us a look-see around your green room. Not just a green room, your green room.
Nope, because I have my laptop precariously positioned atop a garbage bin.
Spin it around.
Nope, because it could fall off, and then this audio-visual medium would come crashing down. So I would have taken you into the newsroom, Rex, but I did see the great Jaime Diaz, one of the all-time great writers and now a contributor on Golf Channel. And I was talking to him, what we're working on, things we're talking about. He said, "Yeah, we do some stuff on distance here as we look forward to January and February." In advance of the governing bodies potentially making some decisions here about the distance that the golf ball is traveling these days. I said, remember when that was like the biggest thing that we were talking about? You're talking about mud at Hero. We're talking about distance. But no, LIV Golf has absolutely overtaken everything that we have worked on this year. Now, Rex, this kind of the origins, the roots have been sown for this LIV Golf issue dating a number of years ago. You think back to 2020, and Rory McIlroy in Mexico saying that he wanted to be on the right side of history. But it really came to the forefront at Riviera, the Genesis Invitational in February. You and I were both there. Take us back to your recollections of that day when it really seemed like the game was on the brink of being changed forever.
And I'm not going to refer to it as LIV Golf anymore. And this is absolutely no disrespect, but there was a filing last week in the lawsuit. It's a different lawsuit, the one that's in the Middle District of Florida now. And it kind of goes back to the origins of when the PIF, the Public Investment Fund of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, sort of started coming up with this plan that they want to get their foot in golf in a bigger way. And they called it Project Wedge. And I don't know why, but I was so taken with...
Because it's going to drive a wedge through the game?
Maybe, or maybe wedge is in, maybe it's, they're hitting wedge shots. I don't know. But I'm like, this is funny. Like, there is someone sitting at a desk in the PIF of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, concocting this master plan, and it's going to be, yes, Project Wedge.
Imagine how much money that person made to come up with the name of Project Wedge.
So, the earliest vestiges of Project Wedge came up probably in 2018, but you're right. It seemed everything coalesced in February in Los Angeles at Riviera. It was surreal. You and I have talked about this before on the pod, and just walking down that big hill behind Riviera down to the driving range, and it's all anyone was talking about, what Phil had done in this interview with Alan Shipnuck with the Fire Pit Collective website. And Alan was working on a book at the time that's since been published on Phil, and he ended up writing this separate story because he felt like we can go back and rehash that. But essentially, you got the impression that Phil just wanted to burn it all down. That it felt that day to me that Phil is tired of all of it. He's tired of the tour side of it. He's tired of the Project Wedge side of it. He just wants to move on. And what he came up with was this hugely inflammatory quote, saying that they're scary MFers, talking about the Saudi Arabians and Yasser, who's the governor of the PIF. He also took shots at Jay Monahan, the commissioner of the PGA Tour.
Took shots at everyone. No one was spared.
One very, very meaty, consequential paragraph. He just burned it all down. He just burned it all down. Like, I'm done with all of it. And I just remember walking up and down the range and not even talking to players, but watching them react as they read it and saw it on their phone, and sort of how this sunk in. Because now in retrospect, a little bit we know behind the scenes of Project Wedge, it almost completely destroyed it right before it even got off the ground. I mean, Yasser had to come up with a decision that, okay, we're going to do this. But man, that seemed like that's the day when it became real for a lot of people.
The scary MFers line is obviously the one that drew all the headlines. The one that I come back to even now when we're recording this.
Do we have to use MF, or can we use the word? No.
Yeah, this isn't the Chris Sims podcast. We're gonna be very, very PG rated on this here Golf Central podcast presented by Callaway Golf. But Rex, I come back to the line where he said he was using it solely for leverage because it was a once in a lifetime opportunity to change what the PGA Tour can become, and that he wasn't even sure whether Phil Mickelson wanted LIV Golf to succeed. That's why, and we're now 8-9 months on from that point. Ever since Phil uttered those words, and he's claimed they were off the record, he didn't say necessarily that he was misquoted or it was out of context. He claimed that was a private conversation. Well, private conversations still yield your true feelings on the matter. And those were Phil Mickelson's true feelings on this venture, that he didn't really want it to succeed. He just wanted to change the PGA Tour. And so from that point forward, ever since those excerpts were published, I've had a hard time viewing what Phil Mickelson says since publicly without a healthy dose of skepticism, because now he's answering to new bosses with the Golf Saudi, LIV Golf, the Public Investment Fund, Greg Norman, whoever his myriad bosses are now. Does he actually want this to succeed? Does he actually believe in it? Or now that the check's cleared, is it a little bit easier to stomach now that he's making a reported $200 million in signing bonus? That's kind of where my head goes to 9-10 months on.
Well, it's twofold. And one thing is, and we've both done this long enough, that I've sat in front of Phil Mickelson in a press conference or just in a little bit more relaxed setting. He always has an agenda. That is the one thing that I've always sort of wanted to study when it came to Phil Mickelson. He didn't show up at these things just willy-nilly wanting to answer questions. And it didn't matter what you asked him. He was going to steer his answer wherever he wanted to go. And maybe sometimes that was distance, and I have a new driver and I'm hitting it 10 yards further, or fitness, or whatever the case may be, whatever the subject du jour for Phil in his mind was. So there is part of me that believes that it was almost orchestrated, that he knew exactly what he was doing, and it actually did put him in a position of leverage, because if he walked away, if he turned down the money, then that probably would have ruined it. I don't know that they could have gone forward with the players they had at that time. Everything probably would have unraveled. But I think probably in his mind, he was playing a negotiation game. And as you pointed out, $200 million, it probably worked.
The surreal nature of the week at Riviera was how swift and severe the backlash was towards Phil Mickelson, who wasn't in the field. We should point out, but what it led to, Rex, was this wave of player announcements. The PGA Tour ran players through the pre-tournament press conference schedule, vowing their fealty to the PGA Tour. You had players like Bryson DeChambeau and Dustin Johnson craft these statements through their agents, kind of disavowing the Saudi tour and saying that they were committed to the PGA Tour and looked forward to committing all of their time, energy, and resources to that circuit. Obviously, it did not turn out that way. What allowed LIV Golf to eventually launch 4 months later? It seems like the leadership was gung-ho on this venture, whether they were going to get the mediocres, as they so famously put it in the New Yorker article, or not. They were full steam ahead with the resources behind it.
And I think at that point, even with what Phil did, and even with that probably forcing a couple of star players to the sidelines, and players who probably would have been on board otherwise, it was a roadblock for them. But as we now have seen, I mean, it wasn't the roadblock. They were able to piecemeal something together, at least in the short term, play that first event. And I think that's what a lot of guys needed to see. A lot of guys who ended up making the jump, Cam Smith, probably the best example of this, he probably needed to see some sort of proof of concept. You need to hold some tournaments. You need to prove to me that you can get the top players in the world. You need to prove to me that you can get some sort of attention. Now, we can sit here and debate at what level of attention those events ended up getting. But I think it was a significant moment, and this goes back to, I believe it was the New Yorker article where I think you referred to the mediocres, where Majed Al-Sarrar, who is the CEO.
I mean, what a line! What a line!
We'll take the 20 players we got, I believe was what they had at that time. And I'm assuming Phil was part of that group since he was in that first. And then you put whatever mediocres you want and we'll move forward. And my mind immediately goes to all those other players that were in that first field in London. And you're like, oh, like no one wants to read that I'm a mediocre. You may know it in the back of your mind, but if you're, I don't know, and I'm not even trying to be mean here, but if you're Andy Ogletree, who was playing in that first event, you got to be like, that was me. He's talking about me. Like, that's what happened.
The lights just went out here. We're going to have to definitely pause.
I noticed that. Power through this. No. Oh.
Here we are.
Power through it.
This is an audio
going in the dark.
Visual medium. You're in your little, I'm not even sure what that room is, and what that particular chair is over your left shoulder. But you're. I don't even think Andy Ogletree would qualify as one of the mediocres. I think that's a little bit of a crying shame. I think when you look back to Rex, like all the names.
What are you saying Andy Ogletree qualifies as? If he doesn't qualify as a mediocre, you're not even putting him at a mediocre level?
No, he hadn't accomplished anything. And like credit to him, he won an Asian Tour event late in 2022. But like he won the U.S. Amateur, and he disappeared.
Ogletree catching strays on the year-end podcast. Ouch.
Apparently, I mean, you threw Andy Ogletree out there. I was thinking more like a Jason Kokrak type as a mediocre, but you went all the way down to Andy Ogletree. It is interesting, Rex. Like, and you and I were discussing this. We're talking to players. We're hearing a lot of the same names. And during that week at Riviera, all the names that were bandied about as being interested in LIV, going to LIV, you had already signed with LIV. It kind of came to fruition, did it not? I think the one kind of head fake was Brooks Koepka, and I'm sure we'll get into that once the season had launched in June. But Brooks Koepka was I'm committed to the PGA Tour. This was at the U.S. Open at Brookline, and then it literally
how dare you ask me about this?
But like a matter of 48 to 72 hours, he had switched, had stopped answering guys' texts and phone calls, and was playing for the other team. Let's diagnose, Rex, the PGA Tour's response to this initial LIV threat. Now, there's a lot of folks who were concerned, even dismayed, that Commissioner Jay Monahan had completely stiff-armed Greg Norman and Golf Saudi, like wouldn't even have a conversation with him. In hindsight, that does not look to be like the best decision. But a month later, we're both at the Players' Championship, and Jay Monahan gives his kind of state of the PGA Tour address on the eve of the eve of the Players, and he said, "Look, our guys are interested in legacy, not leverage. We're gonna."
Good line.
We're going to look at the tradition of the PGA Tour. That's what's important to us. Like, it almost seemed the second week of March that the PGA Tour viewed this LIV threat as dead. Dead in the water was the expression that Roy McIlroy used at Riviera, and it certainly seemed like Commissioner Jay Monahan carried that same tone on the eve of one of the 5 biggest events of the year.
I think so. You know, it's funny, as I was going through some stuff in one of the lawsuits last week, and I had seen this memo before, but I just it's kind of been an avalanche when it comes to sort of these legal challenges. They don't let up. But I actually took the time to read it, and this was in March 2020, and it was from Monahan to just specifically the board members, no one else, just the 5. Well, at the time, I think it was only 4 player directors and then the 5 independent directors on the board. And it essentially was a point-by-point response. Like, this is what we're hearing, this is what we know that's happening, and this is how we're going to respond. Now, this memo is probably going to end up being somewhat of a smoking gun when it comes to the lawsuit. In retrospect, someone's probably thinking to themselves, we probably shouldn't have written all those things down, because it sort of reads exactly like what you would expect an antitrust, a company who's trying to violate the Sherman Act would exactly write down. But I do find it fascinating that their response, and I think I have been outspoken about this, certainly I know you have, when we look back, and it's been very, very easy to criticize Jay Monahan, and I guess my main criticism is kind of twofold. One, why didn't you just meet with them? Why didn't you meet with them when they were the PGL?
It almost seems irresponsible to not at least hear what they're proposing.
Yes, and I still feel that way, and I don't know, and the answer that the commissioner has given us, the answer that the commissioner has given me, is that there were sponsors on board for the PGA Tour. Without naming them, I think we can probably guess. RBC is the obvious one that immediately comes to mind, who would never have allowed it. They weren't going to allow the PGA Tour to work with the PIF in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. For whatever reason, it sounds to me like when it comes to RBC, and I can use that one as a perfect example, because if you go back a few years, Dustin Johnson won the Saudi International twice, I believe, and Harold Varner won it once. And both those players are RBC players, and just look at their bags that week, and the RBC logo's not on their bags. So in this particular case, I can kind of see it, but still, I don't know how, even Keith Pelley, he at least had a meeting with him, the famous Malta meeting, which sounds much more sinister than it probably was. But I think that as a CEO...
But that was kind of a transformative moment, was it not? Like the European Tour was veering, which path should we go down? Should we get in bed with the Saudis, or should we form the strategic alliance with the PGA Tour? They chose the latter.
And I still believe that Jay or someone from the tour should have met, even if it was Andy Pastor, if it was quiet, if it was in a coffee shop in Miami. Yeah, if it was in a coffee shop in Miami, you just needed to have a conversation and find out where both sides stood. I'm less critical now as far as the response, because you read this memo and you're like, well, they did have a plan, and maybe it wasn't the best plan. I'm not quite sure what they could have done at that point for a better plan, because it sounds to me like everything was sort of on board when it came to Project Wedge. But I would sort of turn this back on you and myself. But like, neither one of us saw this coming as well. Now, Jay and the rest of those folks in Ponte Vedra are paid to see this coming. But if you and I are having this conversation just a very, very scant 12 months ago, we could not have predicted what happened over the last 12 months. It would have been impossible. And our minds would not have gone to any of this.
But the counter to that is it is not our job to know that. If you are the head of a billion-dollar enterprise like the PGA Tour, it is your job to know the existential threats that exist. Like, could he have seen COVID coming? I'm talking about Jay Monahan and the PGA Tour. Absolutely not. And I think everyone would applaud the PGA Tour for how they handled that crisis and the return to golf, one of the first major sports to do so. And I think everyone would argue that it was highly successful in doing so. But this had been at least bandied about, perhaps, in hushed tones for the past 4 or 5 years. And
going back to 2018 at least, yeah.
Yeah, like, you can't just have talking points for this. You can't, like, it sounds really great to say we're interested in legacy, not leverage. This was not a PR battle. And I think that became blatantly obvious when players started signing for 9-figure paydays. Like, they were not going to be dissuaded by the sports washing argument that I think most people would be morally opposed to. They didn't have a sound plan to combat that aspect. It was just
and
like
I'll
like
correct
a PR
you. Like,
game.
these bullet points weren't talking points. These were action items that were in this memo, things that they needed to do and things that they had already done going forward. So to be clear, and again, I'm not going to sit here in December of 2022 and defend the tour. Like, clearly things were not handled well on both sides. I mean, if you want to blame someone, it's the Bono line from YouTube: throw a rock in the air, you'll hit someone guilty. But in this particular case, reading that over again and sort of digesting it, I don't think that Jay and the rest of the team up in Ponte Vedra were given enough credit. They tried. I'm not quite sure what they could have done outside of talking.
Exactly. Talk publicly, because in March, LIV had just been pushed to the back burner. Rory's calling it dead in the water. I think most reasonable people thought that this threat had sort of been neutralized. Had Jay Monahan come out at the Players' Championship, outlined what this path forward looks like for the PGA Tour, made a more persuasive argument about why this is the best tour other than just legacy and tradition and all these talking points. If he'd showed, like, look, this is how much the guys are going to begin to make, and you can still play at all these fantastic events in the PGA Tour, I think perhaps the environment would have been different. Maybe Dustin Johnson wouldn't have made the leap. Maybe Brooks Koepka wouldn't have made the leap. Maybe the Abe Answers and Carlos Ortiz's and the Joaquin Niemans wouldn't have made the leap. I don't know. We're just speculating at this point, 10 months on. But had he verbalized some of these plans as opposed to keeping them inside Ponte Vedra, I just wonder whether the outcome could have potentially been different, because at least from the outside, it looked like a lot of inaction from the PGA Tour, did it not?
It did, and to your point, and this is only going to fuel what you're saying in this particular case, of all those bullet points, it's not Jay or anyone else on his staff that ended up coming up with the solution where we're headed right now. It was Tiger and Rory, and it was at the meeting in Wilmington, Delaware. Like, let's be very, very clear, and whoever else was in that meeting and in their camp that sort of came up with whatever concept we're going to have going forward. The 12 elevated events, the elevated purses, how the PIP is going to define the top players, like the things that they've done to reward and compensate the top players weren't driven from Ponte Vedra, and I think that's very telling.
Greg remained undeterred and vowed to launch his inaugural season after all, and it did so the first week of June over in London. It played opposite the RBC Canadian Open the week before the U.S. Open. Do you remember, Rex, 6 months ago, what your initial expectations for this LIV season were, and how quickly into this first season did they begin to shift?
Well, I don't know that I ever had expectations. I mean, there was a curiosity. I remember sitting in my office, and I think we had a show on at that point. So we were I believe either Golf Today or Golf Central was on live, and we were kind of reacting to what was happening in London. So I remember watching it. There was a level of curiosity. Like, I don't know what it was going to look like. It was going to be a different product. They didn't want to do a 72-hole PGA Tour event. So there was a level of curiosity. Now, how it's changed, I don't think anyone can deny that the product that they ended up fielding and the 8 events that they had, it's pretty good. Like, we can sit here and nitpick and say that we didn't like this or we didn't like that, but you look at the field and you look at the product that they pointed out. I was at the Doral event when they finished their season. It's a good product. Like, you may not like it. It may not be your brand of vodka. That's fine. That's up to you. But it's a good product. So from that first event in London to where they landed, I think I came around to a begrudged, okay, like, they have their thing. PGA Tour has their thing. this is going to be decided in the court of public opinion. It's going to be decided by what you, the viewer, want to watch.
What do you think about the roster of players that they were able to assemble? Dustin Johnson was the first big name to do so. And, I mean, that was a little bit of a stunning revelation. You figured, the Lee Westwoods, the Ian Poulters, obviously Phil Mickelson would all be drawn to this. But DJ, I mean, he's a generational great, future Hall of Famer, lifetime member of the PGA Tour, two-time major champion, and kind of a down year in 2021. But boy, at the end of 2020, you're like, this dude's best golf might be ahead of it. And it just seemed at that time with that signing, like, why is he throwing it all away? Like, why is he just coasting in that? Do you think that DJ's decision to join LIV was eye-opening for the remaining players that we saw follow suit, whether it was Cameron Smith or whether it was Joaquin Neiman or now the reported 4 to 7 who are set to join for 2023? Do you think his was kind of like the transformative moment?
It might have added a level of legitimacy that probably wasn't there before. Absolutely, because you're right. This is a generational talent. We've talked about this before on the podcast. That seems like the one guy that everybody misses on a PGA Tour range is DJ. And look, you and I didn't see that. Like those of us on the outside, we just kind of giggled because we're like, DJ. DJ's being DJ with some silly stuff sometimes. However, he is truly missed on. I mean, I was talking with players last week at the Hero World Challenge about this. As far as the players go, I have found that one size does not fit all. Everybody had a different reason. I think you did a really good job of articulating this early, saying that Bryson DeChambeau was never going to play 20 years on the PGA Tour or anywhere else for that matter. That's not the way he is wired. He's wired to try to dig into something as hard as he can for a very, very short, intense sprint and then move on to something else. There's going to be something bright and shiny that comes up in 3 years from now that Bryson's going to want to go to. And in this particular case, he got generational wealth. I mean, I don't know what his number was. I think 130 million or something along those lines. He was rewarded with generational wealth in essentially a pretty short-term contract. I believe everybody signs 5-year deals, if not a little bit less. And now he has that luxury. Now, look, he lost a lot of stuff in the transaction, and I would say DJ is a little bit different because, let's face it, DJ was never going to play into his 50s. He wants to probably cash in and then go spend time on his boat in South Florida. I mean, everybody had a different idea of what they were doing. Certainly, we've talked about Richard Bland and Lee Westwood and Harold Varner. And so everyone had their own specific reason for doing this.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly a good point. And when you looked at the initial roster of players that they were able to secure, it was almost like a band of misfits, right? Like it was players who had either worn out their welcome on the PGA Tour, they weren't particularly friendly with their peers on the PGA Tour, they were either past their prime, undeveloped. Like it was kind of cobbling together all of those guys at one place. And then obviously DJ, well, Phil was the headliner because just an enormous legendary figure in the game. But DJ was like, here's our guy. He is a great player, still one of the best players in the world, 37 years old at the time. Like, this is a guy who can play here for 3 or 4 years. He's going to give us an instant credibility because DJ, everyone knows him. He just won a major a year and a half ago. Like, this is the guy that we have to hitch our wagon to. I think that was huge to get it off the ground, to get people at least even remotely interested. Not to throw Andy Ogletree under the bus again, since you mentioned him, but like if it's
so many strays,
if it's Andy Ogletree and 47 of his friends, like no one is going to watch that. But DJ at least had a little bit of curiosity into his decision, why he possibly could have done this besides just the $150 million paycheck. Cam Smith, though, was the one that I think could have the most significant impact, because this was a player who won the Players' Championship with his very large, what do you call them, Rex? That Cam Smith used to win the Players' Championship? Yes. He won. He was there. He was in the final group of Scotty Scheffler at the Masters. He had the duel with John Rahm at the beginning of the year. Like, this was looking like Cam Smith's breakout year. And then you get to the Open Championship, and he comes home in 30 at the Old Course in St. Andrews, chases down Rory McIlroy, and wins the Claret Jug for his first major championship. This is Cam Smith's breakout year, and what does he do? He commits to LIV Golf and his future. What was your reaction to that move, and what's the trickle-down effect of it? I mean, what are the repercussions of a player who is having the best season of his life with only more accolades and accomplishments to gain, taking this, what I would call a calculated risk?
Oh, it's very much calculated risk because we're assuming that the established ecosystem, that they're always going to push back on this. Now, that being said, I would expect him to be able to play the majors just like anyone else would because of what he accomplished this year on the PGA
He's
Tour.
exempt. He's exempt into the Open until he's 60. He's got 5 years for the other majors.
65, I think. Yeah, I don't see the majors. That's a different subject. I don't see the majors changing those criteria. Number one, they don't have to. This is all about the world ranking. And number two, I don't think they want the shade. I mean, look, we've seen the avalanche of legal nonsense that can come down on you if you decide to make a very, very bold move. And I just don't think any of the major championship organizations want to do that. However, in Cam's place, Spot, I think we had heard about it for so long, and I think, at least personally, I became desensitized to the idea that he was leaving, because I have looked, and I guess the counter is we can also sit here and talk about all the rumors that didn't come to fruition. Certainly, Hideki Matsuyama is the one that immediately pops into mind, because I'm thinking to myself, and I think we've discussed this, like in Hideki, I mean, Project Wedge isn't just getting a top player; they are getting an entire region of the world, and so you would think that he was a priority for them. Just for no other reason than he could become the face of sort of that entire Asian market for them. And they want a team from Japan or wherever else they can sort of leverage this on. So in that case, I think which we ended up with by the time, at least in my mind, at the time that Cam left, which was just after the Tour Championship, I felt like you kind of knew who was on one side and who was on the other. I say that, and before this recording comes out, there could be a bombshell and someone could leave and I would be shocked. And I'm sure that there are 4 or 5 more players that are just poised to go right now. But it seems like the battle lines are so clear now. And it seemed like that when Cam went.
You make a great point, and it might be a little bit of a peek behind the curtains, but this was one of the most challenging years, I think, journalistically that I've had. And I'm sure you would agree as well. Just kind of like sifting through the misinformation. It was the first time that golf has had a rumor mill, and like folks love this with like the NFL, Major League Baseball, like it's the winter meetings now, the NBA and kind of the trade discussions and those rumors and the speculation and the sources, like all this stuff. This finally happened in golf. What was your experience like journalistically, like avoiding the misdirection and trying to get to the heart of the matter? Because by the time the Cam Smith stuff came out, like I'd heard it all about every single player. Every single player is interested. Every single player has a number. I just sat there and waited for the LIV Golf release to come out to announce the player signings, because at that point I didn't know who or what to believe anymore.
I would say, and you're right, we love the transaction. And at no time in the history of golf has that been proven more thoroughly than this year, because you're right. This was all about the transaction. It had nothing to do with the golf, the 54 holes, the team aspect. It had nothing to do with that. It's just we needed to see who the next wave, and we're still waiting for the next wave of players. I think for me, and this probably came across as I was writing it, sort of that misdirection. And look, Project Wedge is very, very good, or they proved themselves to be very, very good at sort of continuing the narrative, and they just let these players drip out one at a time. And again, I think we talked about this.
It's trying to simulate the idea of momentum and
they're not going to announce all 4.
For the PGA Tour.
I mean, all 48 at one time. It was going to be, we're going to do it over 48 weeks. It's going to be one player. They didn't do it that way, but that was the concept. Like, we're just going to continue. We're going to be a headline every single day. And that, of course, is going to drive people at the PGA Tour crazy. I guess for me, it came to a head at, and it wasn't at Doral. It was at, I believe, one of the events either in Saudi Arabia or in Asia, where the world ranking equation came up again, and pretty much everybody was singing off the same page for LIV Golf, which is, oh no, we'll get world ranking points, and if we don't, then something's wrong with the system. And I guess my problem with that was just because you can't say something over and over again and expect it to be true. That's sort of the problem with society. That's the problem with journalism over, I would say, the last 5 or 6 years, is just because you say something loudly and over again, that doesn't make it true. In this particular case, we know that not to be true. There is a standard to get included into the World Golf Ranking, and Project Wedge has not met that standard. And maybe they do eventually, maybe they are allowed in, but that's when sort of I had enough Like saying something loud and over again doesn't make it true. Just stop it.
I love your continued bit that you're just going to continue to call this Project Wedge and not LIV
I'm
Golf.
not even meaning it disrespectfully. To be clear, like I'm not doing this to be. I just like I thought it was comical. I thought it was so funny that someone at the PIF in Saudi Arabia, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, was sitting in a cubicle and they're like, "Hey, what are we gonna call this?" And it's Project Wedge. It could have been Project Putter. I don't know.
Project Wedge, biggest mediocres. There's plenty of good ideas coming out of those brainstorming sessions. So that's the backstory, Rex. Let's look at the state of things right now, and I think you can break this into 3 different categories. We're sitting here, we're recording this on December 6th. This is getting published the second week of December. Let's first touch on the antitrust lawsuit LIV Golf has engaged in with the PGA Tour, and then the PGA Tour has countersued. You have covered this more extensively than anyone, thank God, because I didn't want to have to dabble into it. However, how do things stand at this point with a trial date, tentatively set at least, for January 2024?
I mean, I think that's wildly ambitious, and I think that's probably going to come to a head more sooner rather than later. It was set for January 2024, specifically in that court, because I think the judge was trying to be proactive and saying that either you get this date or we're looking at 2025. Like, it's a very crowded calendar in this particular district, and I think the judge was just trying to lay the ground rules. Like, you guys tell me what you want. And, of course, Project Wedge was motivated to move this along as quickly as possible for a lot of different reasons. So they wanted an expedited case. But the agreement was, okay, we can do the expedited schedule. And I know that doesn't sound, a year and a half is not expedited in many people's minds. We can do it as long as you guys play nice in Discovery. And at least early in the process, they're not playing nice. So there's no way we end up in January. I would be shocked if that goes to trial in January 2024.
Tiger Woods, Rory McIlroy, they have at least left open the possibility that there could be some sort of reconciliation, some sort of resolution, some sort of compromise, Rex, between these two warring bodies. Tiger Woods even used a legal term. Kudos to him. 2 points for Tiger Woods using stay. In other words, postpone or pause the legal action.
Tiger is so good about picking up those
loves it.
Like
just loves the lingo.
Yeah, and he did it every time there was like a back issue, or every time he didn't activate his glutes. That was one of the, like, someone just throws something into a conversation and Tiger just seems to glom onto it.
What do you think, Rex, the chances are, and this is pure speculation, of course, which is what we love to do here on this podcast. What do you think the chances are that we even get to the point where, look, let's pause the litigation. Let's see if we can hammer out a point.
I had a colleague, I'm not going to call him out because he probably wouldn't want me to do that, but I had a colleague who brought up a really interesting scenario. What if, and we know now that Rory and Tiger are very much, reading off the same page. Like, they both pretty much said the exact same thing, that as long as the litigation goes away and Greg Norman leaves, then at least we can have a conversation. I thought it was very, very significant because, look, they're the two spokespeople. They're driving the boat. And if these two are saying that there's a chance to talk, I think that's the first glimmer of hope that I've seen in this entire process. But this colleague of ours brought up the idea that the one thing we do know about the Saudis is they do not like to be told no. And in this particular case, for you to stand there publicly and say, okay, fire that guy, and he's their handpicked guy, in some twisted way, they may actually be playing sort of the reverse game here. And they know that by telling them to get rid of Greg, they won't get rid of Greg. And the idea being that as long as Greg's still in charge, that means that someone who's better at their job doesn't step in and get that job. I thought that was deep state stuff, but it's interesting.
That's certainly an interesting conspiracy theory. I did think, Rex, when you saw that, the report from our buddy James Corrigan in the Telegraph with Mark King being primed, a former TaylorMade executive, current Taco Bell CEO, being primed to take over Norman. I know, this got me so delicious. Primed to take over Norman's spot as the leader of LIV Golf. That seemed like a plant from the LIV Golf side, did it not? To sort of undermine Norman's credibility. Like, his job status has been rumored for months. It doesn't seem like the amount of times that he has put his cleat in his mouth over the past 6 months. You would think he would be on borrowed time with LIV Golf. You put in a professional businessman to run the operation at that point. I think Greg Norman has served his purpose. He's a controversial figure. He's a divisive figure. He's a global figure, well-known figure in the world of golf. He has the connections. He has the contacts. But at this point, he's got the players that he wants to get. They're going to get 4 to 7 more, whatever the case may be, by the end of 2022. Do you think Norman's in this for the long haul, or is he just kind of a figurehead at this point? Because he, at least at this point, to hear Tiger and Roy publicly, Norman's the sticking point. If Norman goes, okay, then perhaps we can reach a compromise.
Yes.
Yeah.
Norman in the lawsuit. I think probably the bigger deal, actually, on the Project Wed side would be the lawsuit. Because if you do stay it, which is the right word for Tiger Woods to use, again, someone gave him the right lingo on that one, then you're essentially kicking the can. So you're pausing a process that they want to go as quickly as possible. So I think there's a longer shot for them to actually stay the lawsuit, because it doesn't behoove them. As long as you can keep moving forward in the lawsuit, there is an opportunity that you may come out and not need a conversation, that you may come out and the players may end up with world ranking points, and they may end up being able to play the PGA Tour if that's what they choose to do. When it comes to Norman, no, I don't think we're having this conversation 12 months from now with him being still the CEO, for all the reasons we pointed out. And we have said this, that imagine had they had someone competent in that job. And we just gave 8 events, that field, what they ended up doing. They was professionally run tournaments. Where they started, that's an impressive jump. They made a big leap in 2022. What if you had someone competent in the CEO job? I mean, it sounds like I'm dragging Greg Norman, but I think his track record when it comes to businesses speaks for itself. I don't have to be overly critical on that. I would just suggest you go Google it and you can see it for yourself. He's not proven himself to be a very successful business person. In Greg's defense, I found most professional athletes aren't very good business people. They think they are, is the problem. They think just because they can hit a golf ball that they understand business and every decision they make is going to be the right decision. It's at some point, it's going to be a tipping point. They're going to have to cut bait, as we say here in the South, and just go with someone who is competent and understands business and can move this forward. I would say the most important part of that is they got to get a television deal. They need 2 things: television deal domestically in the United States and world ranking points. World ranking points they're going to have to wait for, but it seems to me that Norman has not been able to secure that TV deal, and that's a problem.
So that's what I wanted to get into here, because when you talk about compromise, resolution, whatever word you want to use, from the PGA Tour side, you understand. Tiger Woods made the point at the Hero World Challenge that if the Saudis spent $2 billion in 2022, what's keeping them from spending $4 or $5 billion to get the players that they really want and to get this thing in a position that they feel could be profitable in the future? The PGA Tour cannot win that battle. And so potentially yielding some space in the golf calendar or reintegrating some of these stars like Dustin Johnson, Cam Smith, and Brooks Koepka back into the fold. I understand that from a business perspective. But if you're LIV Golf and you're sitting here at the end of 2022, why would you necessarily be interested in a compromise at this point, Rex? Because, okay, when you're sitting at this point, you don't have world ranking points, you don't have any corporate sponsorships, you don't have a television deal, but you can. There's at least talk of maybe buying time on a network. The LIV's bid through the MENA Tour, that's the workaround to get world ranking points. You would think that would be heard before its official application, which was submitted back in July. Corporate sponsorships, when players own their own franchises, there's talk about how that's going to be built out in the coming year. To me, right now, end of 2022, I'm not sure why LIV would be in a position to want to compromise. Sure, 12 months from now, if we get to a point where you still don't have a television deal, you still don't have any corporate sponsorships, you were denied world ranking points, then yeah, it might be time to say this is a failed venture. Golf Saudi folks seem hell-bent on making sure this is successful, making sure that this becomes a profitable business and the future of the game. Are you aligned with that sort of thinking? Because to me, if you're LIV leadership, it's premature to even go down that route right now.
Yeah, I mean, let's assume it's $2 billion is the number supposedly that's been invested in this. There's nothing stopping them from doing that again next year or even more. Like that, if you look at, they're the second largest sovereign wealth fund in the world. It's $750 billion. So you do the math. $2 billion is not a big dent based on
pocket lint. It's pocket lint.
they find that in the seat cushions of the Mercedes-Benz. So I don't think the money is going to be the issue. And I think as long as you continue to see traction, and I'm talking about as long as the PIF and Yasser continues to see traction, as long as he continues to see events being played, attention being played, headlines across the globe being talked about. I mean, this was going to be, I think I just saw yesterday that it was the story of the year for Sports Business Journal as far as sports business. As long as they keep seeing that, and look, there's pushback. Like, we're talking about sports washing. Saudis don't seem to care. All they want to do is get in the game, and that's what they've done. I see absolutely no reason for them to scale back, turn around, or turn off. They have gotten their foot in the door, like it or not, and they're not going anywhere because they have the bottomless pit of money, they have the players they want, and they have some sort of model to go off of now.
The world ranking decision, you would think we would receive it sometime in 2023. The MENA Tour loophole, that decision would come before the official application.
That would be such a small. I mean, I know that where they're thinking on this, but it would be.
But I'm saying, like, an actual decision.
System, it would be, yeah.
But an actual,
you're just
but
not
an actual
going to
decision.
Get enough ranking points.
Yes, and I think even with, as we've seen now with the official World Golf Ranking, the changes they've made to that, even if LIV Golf events do get approved for world ranking points, like, they're significantly harmed by having a limited field, and so it depends how far these players fall out, whether they need to go on an absolute tear in order to make any sort of traction in the world ranking. So that's the LIV side, Rex. How about the PGA Tour side? Because it is at least from the outside, it seemed like Jay Monahan and company were inactive and perhaps not forward-thinking enough in combating this threat. They did make some pretty significant changes, at least by the end of the season. Beginning in 2023, you're going to have this elevated event series. We're going to be having a schedule that goes from January to August, and then the fall is going to have these priority type tournaments, which will determine status. But kind of those big events, Rex, those legacy events that we're so accustomed to, whether it's Riviera, Bay Hill, Players Championship, Memorial, like, they're going to have the absolute best fields, at least the PGA Tour can now assemble, with the biggest purses, $20 million. Do you think that the PGA Tour, beginning in 2023, has gone far enough to satiate the stars in making sure that the PGA Tour is the best place for them to play?
I don't know if they've gone far enough yet, but I think they're getting in that direction. They're moving in that direction. I talked to a member of the policy board the day after the final meeting of this year, so that would have been Tuesday of RSM week, and he told me, I asked him specifically, like, what was the one thing from yesterday's meeting that sort of stood out to you? And he thought for a minute, and he goes, the ways that we're going to find to compensate the game's top players. So I think what we have right now, so we're talking about those magical 20 top players as defined by the PIP. You have the PIP payout, which is significant. I think.
Can we stop calling this a social media contest? It's not a social media contest. Please stop calling it that.
Not even close. Not even close. And I think I asked Justin Thomas about that last week. He gave a great answer. Go check it out. It is not a social media contest, but that's a significant amount of money just from the PIP. You also have the increased purses, as you pointed out. I think the Century Tournament of Champions has a $15 million purse, and the other 11 all have $20 million purses. The understanding is starting in 2024, these events will be limited fields. So you're probably looking at 78-man fields with pretty much guaranteed payouts. There will be a cut, but I mean, you've got to play pretty bad to miss the cut and not get paid. And I think there's even more things, whatever those might be, on the horizon to make sure these top players are compensated. Are they going to get compensated the way they would if they decided to make the jump to Project Wedge? No, probably not, because as Jay Monahan has said, Tiger Woods said this last week, it's a bidding war that the PGA Tour cannot win. You're not going to win going up against the PIF. They have a limitless bucket of money. If they want to win, they're going to win. But you're going to make it a difficult enough decision for the top players now to at least have to think about it. Where, okay, I am making exponentially more money now on the PGA Tour versus 2 years ago, and I get to play the majors, I'm getting world ranking points, I can play the Ryder Cup, I can play the President's Cup, all of those legacy things that we talk about. I think they're sweetening the pot enough going forward that we will end up being able to be competitive.
Is the best thing for the future of the PGA Tour to have 78 player fields? I mean, that's essentially just like a bloated LIV field, is it not? I mean, at least to me, and I did a story coming off of the BMW Championship about this, about like if this is going to be what the future looks like, is that a good thing? I mean, I think there's some, at least some intrigue with having a cut. There's at least like a do or die nature. I think something competitively is lost if it's kind of a 72 hole marathon instead of necessarily a 36-hole sprint, just to ensure that you have some playing opportunities on the weekend. Are you in favor of that model? Do you think that's actually going to resonate with golf fans? I'm a little unsure.
Does it matter if you get the game's top players together at least 20 times a year? Well, that wouldn't be right. At least 17 times a year, based on the model that we're going to be using going forward. Isn't it better now that it was funny
already
talking?
Are though, like they already play these.
No, not necessarily. I think
they play these tournaments 14 times a year. All right, you're adding a couple more.
Well,
everyone already plays. Everyone already plays Riviera.
Right out of the gates. We'll be able to see it and this never happens. We'll be able to see it at Century. As defined by the PIP, all of the game's top players will be in Maui for the season opening event. That's very significant. Now, there's a fundamental debate.
They kind of already were. Rory was the only player last year who skipped. Like, I think the Jordan, the JTs, the Xanders of the world, like they've kind of transformed that event. We're already been heading in that direction. I think what you're going to see in 2023 is, the Heritage. I mean, the Travelers already got a pretty good field. The Wells Fargo always was like a natural spot for the game's top players to tune up. Now for the PGA Championship, back then it used to be the players when they would kind of be gearing up for, like, they're already playing these events now. It's just kind of solidified.
It is solidified, which is, if you're a sponsor, certainly if you're a TV network, I mean, we can speak to that personally. You want to be able to know for a fact that, all right, the top players are going to be here. And that makes it easier for you to package that product, sell that product, and be a profitable business. And that's essentially what this has done. The 78-person field thing is a fundamental philosophical change. And you're right, that's a whole different podcast that we'll have to get into next year. And I get vastly different answers. Like, some players I talk to are like, nope, they would never go to 78 players at the Memorial. Jack wants a 120-man field. That's what he's always had. So I don't know if this is written in stone. I think the PGA Tour has an idea where they want to go. There are still a lot of things that have to move. There are a lot of bits and pieces that need to fall in place. I think what this really comes down to, though, is it's a fundamental change in how the PGA Tour wants to do business. In the past, over the course of my career, over the course of the PGA Tour, it's been playing opportunities for the members. And that means the Tiger Woods members and apparently what the Saudis call mediocres. Whoever is at the tail end of that. Number 125 on the money list. And everyone had a vote, and this was all about getting playing opportunities for 1 and 125. And now I don't think that's going to be the case going forward. This is about making sure those 20 players, as defined by the PIP, are taken care of, making sure they come together on a regular basis at the same events, and the PGA Tour can sell that more effectively.
Which is why the final chapter, Rex, of this podcast is, I would call it the immediate future for both the PGA Tour and LIV Golf. There's no doubt that we are at the end of what is clearly the most contentious, acrimonious year in men's professional golf history. Do you anticipate that same sort of animosity next year? Because as you just mentioned, I think it's a great point and a point that we've touched on throughout 2022. There's going to be some hurt feelings, Rex, moving forward. There's going to be hurt feelings with players who are going to feel marginalized by a lot of these changes by the PGA Tours that are just attempts to satiate the stars to make sure they play on the PGA Tour. There's going to be hurt feelings among tournament directors and sponsors. We've already seen Honda, the longest-running title sponsor on the PGA Tour, bow out of its South Florida event. Certainly, other tournament directors are going to feel slighted by these scheduled changes as well, with ongoing litigation, with the world ranking debate not yet settled. There's clearly going to be more vitriol passed between these two bodies as well. I guess the open-ended question is, what are you expecting for next year?
More the same. I mean, there's no way. I mean, I wish I could sit here and say what Tiger and Rory have done, opening the door, saying that there is an opportunity to talk. I wish I could say that's the first step towards some sort of reconciliation. Is probably not the right word, but coexistence is what we keep coming back to. And I'd like to be able to say that, but again, they have laid down a pretty heavy caveat. It's you have to fire your CEO and you need to drop the lawsuit. And I don't think there's motivation on the Project Wedge side at all to do this, because there's no reason for them to do that right now. Either fire Greg or stop the lawsuit. They sort of have the momentum. And as far as the sort of the vitriol, it's a story that'll be up on golfchannel.com this week, and I essentially kind of dug into how this is, and this goes back to how this is thrown a wedge into the game. Sorry, I didn't mean to do that at all. That sort of came together.
Throwing a project wedge into this game.
When they're throwing a project wedge, that sort of came together on its own, and how it sort of fractured relationships. And certainly, reading the story last week, Rory talking about his relationship with Sergio Garcia and sort of pulling back the curtain. I mean, these were two very, very good friends, and you can kind of go down the line and point out these guys used to be very, very close. They were neighbors. They practiced together. They played together, and now they aren't anymore. And it's for a lot of reasons. I thought it was interesting, and one of the people I interviewed for the story was Joel Damon, and I asked him, why do you think there is this animosity? And he goes, it's probably a lot of jealousy. That those guys on the other side that went to Project Wedge are getting paid a lot of money to play a little bit of golf. And he goes, and yes, human nature is you're going to look at that person and wonder, why didn't I do that? And I think that's only going to continue, and that wedge, is only going to continue to wedge through the game. Brought it home. Did you see that?
There was a lot to digest there. I don't think Rex is going to be quite as contentious in 2023 as we had in 2022, just because I think there is going to be a renewed focus on the golf and the competition. There's not going to be this slow trickle of is he going, is he not going, that sort of week in and week out drama that really overshadowed all of the tournament play on the PGA Tour. The LIV players are going to go play their schedule. The PGA Tour players are going to play that schedule. And then the best players in the world, at least we are anticipating, will see each other 4 times a year at the major championships. It's hard to imagine any sort of LIV player is teeing it up the European Ryder Cup team, especially considering the Rory McIlroy, Sergio Garcia comments that came out in the Irish Independent story. So I think in that aspect, it'll be a renewed focus on the golf. For the PGA Tour, that's fine. It's kind of business as usual. For LIV Golf, there's going to be a brighter spotlight on the actual product. Because if you don't have a TV deal, if you don't yet have world ranking points, if you don't have corporate sponsorships, and this is the product that you're offering, it needs to stand on its own. It can't just be the disruption. It can't just be something new and edgy. It's a team competition now. I'm very curious to see how that pans out and whether 54 holes of tournament golf is appealing in the marketplace, because it is certainly a departure from the norm. Is there anything else, Rex, you wanted to get in there about the number one storyline from us at golfchannel.com? It was certainly a story unlike any other.
You think it'll be the number one storyline next year? I'm going to say yes.
I do.
I can't imagine. If it's not, I'm going to be a very, very happy man. But yes, I think we're sitting in this exact same chair. But I did want to ask, since I'm following you up to Connecticut tomorrow, I'm flying up on Wednesday. You and I are sort of going to tag out. Do I need to know anything? What do I need to know about going to the mothership?
It's beautiful. So this is the first time I've done a studio show. I've been co-hosting Golf Today for the last couple of days. First time I've been in the NBC Sports headquarters in 2 years, and it is an incredible building. I mean, it's like our old Golf Channel studios on steroids. It's beautiful. I mean, this is the best of the best. I mean, this is a behemoth of a company. Beautiful building, Stamford, Connecticut. Haven't done all that much sightseeing. I can vouch for the downtown full-service Marriott as being very nice with a terrific concierge level. Darmy, well done to you. I do hope you win Employee of the Month, as was voted on by me this morning. Rex, I'll keep this chair warm for you in the dressing room. But thank you guys for listening to not just this podcast, the number one storyline of the year podcast is voted on by us on GolfChannel.com, but listening all year on wherever you are receiving your podcast. I'm sure Rex will be sprinkling in a few more throughout the month of December before, we tee it up once again the first week of January, the Century Tournament of Champions. The Project Wedge, of course, does not resume its schedule until mid-February. But, Rex, something tells me we're going to have some more news to digest over the next couple of weeks. And we'll be here for you folks on golfchannel.com and wherever you get your podcasts.
This is when adrenaline soars, pressure is heightened, and expectations are raised.